everybody, wait a minute. Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Sunshine, sunshine. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Yeah, but everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Yeah, what's up, world? Welcome, everybody, where I mix what I like. Please do like, share, subscribe, support the platform however you would like to. And welcome, everybody. And yes, we are live. So welcome, and good to see folks. And before I forget, so there's going to be in between the semester, I'm going to be on Black Liberation Media tomorrow morning, twice actually. So we're going to have a remix morning show tomorrow, a Monday edition of the remix morning show. So please be over there at 8 tomorrow morning Eastern time. And then at 11 a.m. Eastern, the premiere of an interview I did with Leroy Moore about decolonizing disability studies and Black studies will air at 11 o'clock. So please tune into Black Liberation Media tomorrow for all of that and more. Welcome, everybody. All right. Yes. Live today and live tomorrow morning. So this is good. What's up, Leah? Peace. Lisa, good to see you. Thank you all very much again for joining me. And got a couple things, two primary things we're going to look at today that I'm very excited to share with you and to get your feedback on. But I'm going to start with something that Carlos from Deculturation just sent me. And if you didn't see his recent interview on Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, check that out. But first of all, let me start with this. It's halftime of the El Clasico. So I don't know, people, I know it's Sunday, so people watching American football, but world football is killing it right now. It's 2-2 at the half. Barcelona and Real Madrid. 3 goals in the last, I think, minute to 90 seconds of the half. Incredible goals. Vinny's goal was crazy. Even Lewandowski's chip was crazy. So, two main things to get to today. But I did want to start with what Carlos just now sent me. And this is and I'm going to play it from my Twitter account because of what I get to let's see. Oh, I need to replace the share with this. Here we go. So as I said here, if I have ever rested a case, my case is in full-blown slumber right now. And all will be made. Uh-oh, why is it not showing up? Oh no. It's not showing up. Why is, oh no, I'm having a problem with another. There it is. I was about to say another platform. Yeah. Put the El Clasico on in the background. I have it on in the background. The first half was crazy. And if folks don't know, Real Madrid versus Barcelona is one of the greatest rivalries probably in all of sports. But okay. So if I have ever rested a case, my case is in full-blown slumber right now. And all will be made clear when I just push play right here.
And they called you a racist for that?
They did. Which is actually quite interesting because I got a call from the Foundational Black American Society here in Florida who reminded me that Byron's mother is Jamaican, he is Panamanian, and they found it quite insulting in their words that he would try to claim victimhood of slavery without a single descendant of American slaves in his family.
I like those foundational guys.
They're so good.
Tariq Nasheed and all. I mean, I don't agree with everything, but like they've got a perspective. If your family's been here 400 years and the descendants of a lot of American slaves or families have been here 400 years, I don't know. I think that gives...
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
100%.
Hold up, I hit the wrong one. I meant to hit this.
Message.
Ghana and like...
We just go back.
And they called you a racist for that?
Let's just run that back. Let's just run that back. I messed that up. Let's just run that back.
And they called you a racist for that?
They did. Which is actually quite interesting because I got a call from the Foundational Black American Society here in Florida who reminded me that Byron's mother is Jamaican, he is Panamanian, and they found it quite insulting in their words that he would try to claim victimhood of slavery without a single descendant of American slaves in his family.
I like those foundational guys.
They're so good.
Tariq Nasheed and all. I mean, I don't agree with everything, but like they've got
of American slaves in his family.
I like those foundational guys.
They're so good.
Tariq Nasheed and all. I mean, I don't agree with everything, but like they've got
Message.
years, and the descendants of a lot of American slaves or families have been here for.
By the way, having family, where does he say he has family from again?
Reminded me that Byron's mother is Jamaican, he is Panamanian.
So I get it. He's the FBA reverse hashtag backwards community wants to make this point that for claims around enslavement in the United States to mean anything, you have to have been enslaved in the United States. But that is only 5% of the entire enslaved African population. And it does make sense to think that people who are from Jamaica and Panama would have intimate knowledge of the histories of enslavement, colonization, and rebellion, for that matter. Now, I know he's talking about a Black Republican friend of Trump, so I'm not trying to get all into all of that. But just the illogic is
they found
astounding.
It quite insulting in their words that he would try to claim victimhood of slavery without a single descendant of American slaves in his family.
I like those foundational guys.
They're so good.
Tariq Nasheed and all. I mean, I don't agree with everything, but like they've got a perspective. If your family's been here 400 years and the descendants of a lot of American slaves or families have been here 400 years, I don't know. I think that gives... I'll listen to you. Like you've
100%.
You've got a point of view that is legitimate, I think.
Yeah. And they're unequivocally heritage Americans.
That's for sure.
100%.
I mean, they're definitely.
Again, I hold again.
Message.
Heritage Americans, if anyone is. And, someone rolls in from Ghana and gets an MSNBC slot and starts speaking on behalf of Black people. It's like, shut up, honey. You've got nothing to do with this.
Right.
So, and again, when I'm not defending the liberalness of Joy and all of them and all of that, but this has been my point. And please check, if you haven't, the last 2 videos on this subject that I've been involved with Brother Diami about his PhD dissertation on the reverse hashtag group. And then the previous one I did about a study based out of, I think, somewhere in Europe that assessed the arguments of the reverse hashtag community based on their affinity and paralleling the politics of white nationalist conservatives. So that was the point of the study. And then, so here again, as I said, if I've ever rested a case, it is in full slump.
That's a fair perspective,
right?
I think.
And so it's good to actually see them call them out for that. That's actually cultural appropriation. Appropriating the struggle of slavery.
I totally agree.
And the struggle of
look at and this is where I love the R.M. Brown's platform, because he's got a whole bunch of drops and makes fun of Tucker's laugh all the time, this fake whatever affect he's got going here. But look how happy Tucker is at the idea of the arguments of FBA. This is hilarious.
Slavery.
I totally agree.
And the struggle of slavery was real. I don't think Republicans ever want to really whitewash that. It's real, right?
No, Republicans don't want to whitewash slavery. No.
But for
we're
Byron,
against slavery.
We're against it.
Whether it's in the West Bank or here or anywhere.
Oh, wow.
We're against it.
And so for Byron,
Byron's
group, his team, to call me and essentially our entire supporting base racists for saying that you're a slave when quite literally you took $45 million. You won't tell us what you agreed to take that money this early in a primary, which is unprecedented. You know this, how unprecedented that kind of money is in an uncontested primary.
All right, I don't really care about all of that. I don't really care about, and I'm not paying attention to that race. I don't know the details of that. I just think that was just a gem for me. That was very much.
Now listen, that's cool.
Because yeah. So, but again, I'll add the links if folks haven't seen it to the research that shows why Tucker and whoever this other guy was have such an affinity for the reverse hashtag community. And I know FBA is not a reverse hashtag, although I was in Professor Winkler's chat last night and I said FBA is also backwards because it should be ABF, Africans Bring Freedom. So soda and APF, Solidarity of Dispersed Africans, and Africans Bring Freedom. But yeah, I mean, so okay, all right. But let me get to what really brings us here. This wonderful afternoon, because I have begun reading a book by Yoon Song Kim, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, called "The Politics of Collecting: Race and the Aestheticization of Property." And I just want to again have this be part of my long-standing and ongoing war against museums. No, but seriously, why I don't like museums. It's and this book is doing so much of what I would want to do in making my argument. It is a brilliantly written book. It's fascinating. It's about the art world, so it's very much out of my wheelhouse. But what is being discussed here by Kim feels very comfortable. So as I said here in my notes, that this book is helping to materialize or helps us understand how white as whiteness is materialized via narrative, property, finance, and law. That white as whiteness is materialized, is given materiality via narrative, property, finance, and law. Another point, dominant legal and social structures, as this book argues, must read in, quote, must read in when considering the art itself. That is, there is no divorcing art from dominant legal and social structures. Another point that I've already gleaned from this book, colonial origins are used to create monuments of war at the behest of financiers. So there is a very colonial and imperial ethic behind monuments, statues, and museums themselves. All right. So with that, let me just move a little bit in, just to show a little bit, and then I really just want to focus on one. In fact, I'm just going to focus on this one chapter. I just to. I'll come back to the book, but this is at some point maybe, or we can all come back to the book, or whatever have you. But whiteness is property. Whiteness as property and found object art. So quickly, just as something, this is mostly new to me, the details at least. So one of the distinctions the book ends up talking about that I don't know how much we're going to get to in this discussion, but is the differences between ready-made art and found art. Ready-made being it has already been constructed in the world and the artist is just making it something that is art, considered art. And then and then found object art is just that. And then the book, the author, I'm not doing it justice, goes into really lay out some of the imperialist and colonial foundations of the differences between the two. And I think we'll get to a little bit of that here, but I just wanted to at least quickly mention that. But as is and this is really what got me, because in fact, earlier on, I did mean to start in the introduction because I just wanted to show you where this issue of the urinal comes up. Because the question becomes, well, as it says here, museums and archives are spaces that have been delegated as environments where aesthetics can be propertized. The conversation between Safer and Smith concerning aesthetics and finance situates the political and historical backdrop of this book as it demonstrates how issues of financial value become bracketed off from debates over aesthetic value and experience. Aesthetics require indoctrination, which is, I thought, which reminded me of a point I've heard recently brought up again and again in these atheist debate spaces, that when people talk about our intuition, they often don't realize how much our intuition is itself a social construct, that we train our intuition. It's not, from the perspective of atheists, some divinely inspired or the divine speaking to us indirectly. So this kind of reminded me that aesthetics, that what we think is aesthetically pleasing requires indoctrination. And that's why I think it's important when we talk to Mtume and Samantha about, third cinema and training audiences to appreciate a different form of cinema as being part of the process. That's. But the crux of it comes, where did I just wanted to show that initial question. Let me just do it this way. Yeah, this question here. Kim asks, how does a urinal become a sculpture? Appropriation, an innovative new form, exploitation, a performance, management, and aesthetic impulse? I demonstrate how the context of racial capitalism, settler colonialism is vital to understanding how the category of art becomes expanded and vital to materialize the building of institutions that house their collections. All right, so I'm glad I made that correction and went back to that, because that prefigures this chapter here. And this question of, when does a urinal become a sculpture? Let's bum rush a haiku party with conceptual artists. How long can you stare at a urinal for God's sake? Marilyn Chin. As situated in chapter 2, the early 20th century also marked the rise of rising influence of Frederick Winslow Taylor's scientific management, a method invested in to disempower workers, deunionize industries, and aestheticize the role of management. The period discussed in this chapter is often described as a segregation era. So I should have read that part first, because the focus on Marcel Duchamp and the urinal takes place right around World War I, 1917 and prior. So it's important, and the author comes back to this point. But so that's and an era where a new scientific method of management invented to disempower workers, deunionize industries, and aestheticize the role of management. Again, this reminds me so much of The Big Myth and Selling Free Enterprise and these books that have been talking about the corporate management of public opinion in creating an aesthetic around management and the corporate good in the free market economy. That, again, we have to be trained to it, is the point. The segregation era is home to modernism, which coincides with the opening of prominent cultural institutions and the expansion of Carnegie's libraries across the United States. So I like how Kim is again putting into the context of broader politics what these museums and the art world is doing, or the context in which it is working. I seek to demonstrate how the rise of the ready-made, that is Duchamp's well-noted art form, comes from a legal understanding of exclusionary property, rendering the found object as a form that aestheticizes pre-existing racial dispossessions. The distinction is relevant in that Duchamp Arsenberg collection illuminates how members of the leisure class fashion collecting imperatives of pre-existing cultural establishments directly shaping the canon. So a lot of this is talking about how canons are created and how they're weaponized. The Arsenbergs are a very wealthy New York family that bring Duchamp from France. Who Duchamp is himself allowed to escape fighting in World War I for France, defending the empire, because he's being put to work elsewhere in aestheticizing empire. And because he's so well funded and platformed, again, as Dr. Burroughs has pointed out, going back to the Harlem Renaissance, what we end up dealing with are the favored artists sponsored by whites. This is not a commentary on how good or not they are. It is just the point that they only are known, they're only popularized, much like my argument today around hip hop, punditry, Black capitalist narratives. All of it is the will of the ruling elite to popularize what they want to popularize. All right. In fact, let me get to, let's see if I do it like this. Let's see. All right, never mind. Let's see. I want to get to those stressed. All right. Though it is stressed. All right, here we go. Whoops. You know what? Let me just back up a little bit and share a little bit more of this, because this was so fascinating. The previous lack of such a contextual examination is one way by which, as legal theorist Cheryl Harris instructs, whiteness is made neutral and yet proprietary. So even going back to the recent discussions that I had with Marcel Rosales, how whiteness just becomes the norm, everything else is extended from that. As I mentioned in the introduction, tradition racialized anti-blackness appropriation continues today in the aesthetic transfiguration that becomes pop property. The artistic freedom afforded by the Duchampian tradition is invoked to shield artists from criticism. Okay, that happens so often. We talk about it in various ways here all the time. Once it becomes transfigured as property, all right. You can't criticize it. In pursuing the material history of immaterialism and artistic freedom, I explore the relationship between whiteness and freedom and argue, as legal theorist Cheryl Harris has so pivotally laid out, that whiteness as property has tethered whiteness to freedom in all aspects of aesthetic culture, materializing how racialized property claims become interpolated as innovation. So the signification of the urinal is pivotal to the imaginary of the fountain, much as white is predicated on color. So I'll show you this here. This is a remake of what is called The Fountain, Duchamp's 1917 ready-made art, where R. Mutt is his pseudonym, is put on, and it's a urinal. And we're going to come back to why how this is, but I just wanted to show you that this right here, I looked it up. These approved replicas, because the original, the foundation, the fountain original, and again, he's calling urinal a fountain, the original is lost apparently, but they say if it shows up somewhere, it's worth $100 million. This right here, they said will fetch anywhere from $1 to $3.5 million. So I just wanted to whoops. I just wanted to share that to show that. So we have some idea of what we're talking about here. Now, again, I'm not going to get into judging art. I just want to, I just wanted to show you. All right, but let me just go to where I wanted to, because and get to really what the point. Though it is stressed that the marvel of the ready-made is its uplift of an everyday and ordinary object, the socioeconomic function of the toilet becomes further abstracted. The toilet and the drinking fountain occupy a space of recurrence in U.S. history. They are banal emblems of the colonial and engendered signage interpolated by public policy, well sanitation, decorum, and personalized into the rituals and phobias. All right, so I do need to show you this other thing as well, because I think I've skipped. My bad. I think I skipped this. So let me show you this other thing real quick, because my bad. I think I could have done this better. But what Kim is doing here is comparing. Ultimately, what Kim does is to show how the urinal and allowing whiteness to be made material, to have white become whiteness, is made material through the urinal. That by having a urinal created as a fountain in 1917 United States of America, during the height of segregation, where Kim talks about New York as being a site of racism, enslavement, despite being in the so-called North and all of those things. It is often denied how much enslavement and the business of slavery occurred in New York, including, Kim doesn't get into this, I don't know, the history of Wall Street, but shows that the use of the urinal as ready-made art makes whiteness material, erases the context of segregation, and denies what Kim shows is happening at that very time in Black media spaces, which I'm going to show you in a minute, of using the example of Du Bois in The Crisis, of making the argument that there is no separating art from politics. And when you have a very white, French, white American funded, platformed piece of so-called art being used to center whiteness and make it material while erasing the segregated, racialized, racial capitalist reality, using Kim's language, again, racial capitalism, I'm a little less a fan of that as an approach than, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But racial capitalism, in other words, the fountain is used, the urinal as a fountain and as a sculpture is used to concretize, materialize whiteness, erase Blackness and the political economy of race, and work against movements happening at that very time within the Black world. Again, using Du Bois and The Crisis as an example of art being decidedly political. All right. Okay, but that's what I needed to show you, because what she ends, I'm saying she, but I don't mean to say she. Kim, what Kim is, and also comparing to, is this piece of art here. All right. Which is made in 2021 by, I think I'm saying the name right, Plurifoy. And the point of, let me get the name right. No, I'm not saying that right. The point of this was to criticize and show the fountain as urinal as being insufficient, and to return the segregated reality of the Black experience to the center by showing the fountain in juxtaposition to the segregated water fountain and the segregated bathroom. So you have on one side the drinking fountain, and then you have on the other side a toilet, and it's made in this in Joshua Tree, in the desert of Joshua Tree. All right. While, let's see, and it's of Noah Purifoy is the artist, and the art piece is called White/Colored, and it's from 2001. I'm sorry, 2001. And as I'll return here, while not usually read as such, Duchamp's fountain in the ready-made may be reconsidered if it is contextualized in the world of Noah Purifoy's White Colored, an outdoor sculpture in Joshua Tree that places a porcelain toilet next to a drinking fountain. In the slashed landscape of racial capitalism in history materialized by Purifoy, the viewer is asked to consider the historical context of U.S. public spaces and symbols of sanitation, such as the fountain and its correlate, the urinal. All right. So, and the point being that the Duchamp original looked to erase all of that. All right. Or all right, and then I just wanted to come back here. The found form, that is the found art of. So this is where Kim distinguishes. So the ready-made art is something coined by Duchamp, and the fountain as urinal. Found art, the found form, is what we saw in Purifoy's White Colored. The found form is dependent on its origin story, which proclaims the idea can be separated from the object. That is why I argue conceptual art is the commodification of narrative forms and speaks to the monetization of circulation. The story is its aestheticization, its politics, and the aestheticization is dependent on its narrative circulation. How many people know I believe it? Know and believe it. Thus, in the introduction, I described the event of Fountain as mythology, as a story white artists and patrons retell to subsume the property form as the most innovative form of art. If the reading of property in Found is unfamiliar, it is because the racial actualities of U.S. and world history are made unfamiliar while simultaneously naturalized. To reiterate, the objects linked to these narratives do not disappear. They remain on sale and display. My engagement with the donation of Duchamp's objects to the Philadelphia Museum of Art seeks to witness how the practices of multinational corporations and racial capitalism inhabit the acquisition policy and history of the biggest U.S. museums and vice versa. The parasitic relationship between artistic institutions and corporations reveals how the upholding of racial capitalism is sutured into how these institutions were continued to be built and maintained. I wonder what Kim would say about the MOVE movement and the stolen bodies of the members of MOVE killed by Philadelphia's police ended up in that same Philly museum. Additionally, my critique of Duchamp's canonization is not intended as moralistic condemnation, but rather dialogic historical materialization concerning how the found was and is predicated upon property formations available to whiteness in the United States. Investigating the urinal and drinking fountain from 1917 as objects of U.S. segregation and of segregated space and time allows us to understand the stakes of what has been celebrated, immortalized, and institutionalized. Duchamp, at this time, had been excused from fighting in World War I, and he entered the United States in 1915. In exchange for his art objects, he briefly took up residence in studio owned by Walter and Louise Arensberg. Thereafter, he became a member of the infamous Arensberg salons, producing many objects to be purchased by affluent members of New York's art scene. There are many deviations among the stories about the 1917 fountain, authored by Duchamp and currently considered one of the most important works of modern art. Duchamp and his patron enter a plumbing store and purchase a urinal. So there's even so much of what creates value to the ruling elite are the narratives associated with it, which is one of the important threads I think that Kim is drawing on through this book. That the art, and that's that point about, as I understand it, that art gives materiality to whiteness by carrying the narratives and the symbols and making them real in the economy, in social and political power, in colonial rule, and in supporting and justifying colonial rule, which is again why I could not have come up with and could not conceive of and explain it in this way without having the book in front of me. But this is what I am trying to say about what these museums are doing and why they're here. They're not here to inspire us into some revolutionary future. They're here to remind the ruling elite that this is why you're in charge. You deserve it. And you're so powerful that you can take a urinal and make it art and make it a sculpture. Barcelona just took a 3-2 lead. So authored by Duchamp, currently considered one of the most important works of modern art, but also some clear but there are clear consistency. There are many deviations, but clear consistencies in the story about this fountain or this urinal. The event takes place in New York City in 1917 with the support of Duchamp's patron, Walter Arnsberg. In some variations, Duchamp and his patron enter a plumbing store and purchase a urinal. Others refute this account and state that Duchamp makes the urinal, but provocatively tells people he found it. Others argue that Duchamp stole the work from a female friend, either Elsa von Freytag Lornhoven or Louise Norton, and then submitted it as his. For some reason, I probably believe that one more than any of them. All variations conclude with the R. Mutt signature on the urinal, one of Duchamp's artist pseudonyms, a flipping of the urinal's orientation and the title of fountain. It is shown by the Society of Independent Artists, Inc., a collective of white artists, of which Duchamp and his patrons were members. The signed found urinal is lost. Decades later, during the height of the civil rights movement, reproductions authorized by Duchamp were made by Italian artisans to be sold to European and U.S. collectors. Duchamp remains a central figure in art history and contemporary practice, often cited as a pioneer of modern art, the avant-garde, something I'm going to come back to that Kim makes a really good point about. The ready-made form, or maybe we'll come back to it just going through this chapter here. But that is Duchamp is the central figure and a pioneer of modern art, the avant-garde, and the ready-made form. I will return to a discussion regarding the politics of the found form and theoretical readings of Duchamp, but I want to begin by discussing the procedure of Duchamp's institutionalization. Walter Arnsberg wrote to Duchamp in 1945 about the possibility of donating his collection to UCLA. And as is italicized and highlighted here, I am unable to make my feelings for them articulate. If you are, this is. If you are the unknown soldier, let me be the silent guard. In a way, therefore, the museum will be a monument to you, and the presence of all other things will serve as a means of defining how completely is your contribution to the art of the 20th century. So when Arnsberg was trying to find a home for Duchamp's work, and they're trying to basically buy off spaces to put it's as Kim points out, the evocation of the unknown soldier and the silent guard and the museum as a monument to you is again, as I understand, Kim is doing something more deep here, but as I'm understanding that, when the ability of the ruling elite to determine not only what goes into these art collections, but then to impose their narrative, their perspective is that this is a monument to you, not to art, not to even your contribution to the broader body of art, but to you. And then evoking this imperialist language of the unknown soldier and the silent guard. And what Kim does with that is really brilliant. Art and war have long been engaged in a chaotic relationship, a borrowing service of ill use. The term avant-garde originated as a military term indicating a leading formation, the group sent first to seek the enemy and secure ground for incoming troops.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
Art and war have long been engaged in a chaotic relationship. And this idea that avant-garde art is in fact leading the formation of the imperial army, of imperial warfare, seeking the enemy. That is, again, perfectly describing how I conceive of these museums, particularly the ones sanctioned by the state, targeting colonized, genocided, oppressed communities. Their narrative, their form of the art, their presentation of the art for their narrative purposes to make material the whiteness, to make whiteness material, to make whiteness and to make it material, to reshape public opinion, to engage in counterinsurgency and psychological warfare, encouraging the targeted communities who are the sought out enemy to rebrand and reframe how they see themselves and their relationship to this society, and again in how they should engage that society, and what does it mean to struggle, what does liberation mean, what does human mean, what does freedom mean. And no Stone Chowder, no AFCON on at the moment. I would have to, I'm not caught up on AFCON, to be honest with you. And I don't even know if I can watch the games here. I don't even know if I have all the right streaming services for that. But El Clasico is on. I'm sorry, my bad. In the letter, Walter professes he has lived with the artifact so closely, that is Arnsberg, that Duchamp's works have become incorporated into his structure, and he invokes the intimacy through images of war. He invokes this intimacy through images of war. That is, if nothing says colonizer more than that. Who is the enemy, and what is Duchamp advancing? Duchamp's institutional placement was no work of chance, play, or merit. It was not the trickster from absurd and found, or the abrupt narrative of the ready. It was the result of colonial dynastic wealth, and moreover, wealth invested in a particular kind of time, narrative, and property. Is that not a perfect summary of what these museums are? It has nothing to do with merit. It has nothing to do with it. Look at what they're look at what they're saying is so important. And allegedly, this would have been a recreation, but allegedly this would have been. No, I guess if you're buying it at a it's not going to be, but this is what they're talking about in terms of, this is the art in question. So what else could what else could that be but some colonial weaponry? And then the very artifice that would allow for that to be considered art, and then to be considered such a high level of art that it needs to be housed to this day in the Philadelphia Museum, and needs to be so well considered. Again, I had never heard of it before looking at this book, and to hear that for 100 years now, this thing has been seen as such a vital and important piece to the elite white art world is just, again, it is an absolute confession of their colonialism. Yeah, the Philadelphia Museum has yet to break up the Arnsberg Duchamp collection. The objects to this day remain together. And that's why they picked it there, because he said I wanted to have a good air of permanency and that's why they selected that canonizing taste. And this is interesting because when Kim goes through the journals of the Arnsbergs, I keep saying burgers, Arnsbergs, this is, I think, a very important point. They find there's no discussion of, they say that she notes that Louise Arnsberg's journals are curiously untouched by news of the Great War. So you have what is called the Great War then, World War I kicking off, and all that they talk about is sexual liaisons and the aesthetics rather than politics. However, without ever stating directly the word politics, the collection amplifies the reach of whiteness and its desires as property. The collection does not need to pronounce its politics to be witnessed as segregated politically, aesthetically, socially, and otherwise. It doesn't need to pronounce its politics to be witnessed as segregated politically, aesthetically, socially, and otherwise. The presence of segregation and the making of property. It goes without saying that New York City between 1915 and 1917 was far from neutral and remains so today. 40% of New York City residents at that time were former slaveholders, and today the oldest known African burial ground, disregarded for centuries, still bears the intrusive foundations of federal buildings that house various municipal and federal agencies. New York was the only state where African Americans were required to own property in order to vote. And again, this is all very important context, because the idea that art would be created in this context devoid of that context is absurd. However, when Fountain is discussed, the United States in the context of segregation rarely enter the analysis or even the footnotes. Every possible fissure except the historically political or racial is examined. And I would argue so much of that is true. Kim is talking about one particular, using Molesworth's work as one particular example, but I would argue this is very much true of so much of the discussion happening today, and even some of my criticisms around what is described as cultural power or symbolic power. We do everything but fully focus on what is the actual historical and political and racial context applying or imposing itself as a construct or a set of constructs and structures on that art. The decontextualization and re-narrativization of Fountain is routine and is part of the normalizing functions of what Toni Morrison described as the racial unconscious. The operations of the racial unconscious exemplify how white space becomes synonymous with neutrality, and race and context are unable to be configured. I'm hearing exactly what Marcel Rosa-Salas said in the context of advertising and marketing. The genreification of race, of music, is all for of movies, is all for marketing, to make it easier to determine if you call it horror, it's easier to assure yourself an audience. It's easier to construct an audience whose interests you can more easily serve as the producer, as the owners of the means of production, and the producers of the ideological, the dominant ideas of the day. Language necessarily erases difference. Urinal refers to all machines for catching the urine of men, despite the fact that every one of them is different, even those that come off the same assembly line or those that stand side by side in the same lavatory are minutely different, either through the vagaries of manufacture or through the different veils of liquid staining their surfaces. Joslet begins by stating that language erases differences. Then, in a turn that anticipates neoliberal multiculturalism, he imagines the urinal as a functional object despite difference. The urinal cannot see difference, cannot see time, race, class, or history, though apparently it can see gender. I thought that was that's
Now listen, that's called.
I just think this is fascinating and deep, though. By just calling it a urinal, it just erases difference. Because Duchamp's language and performance transform the object urinal into a fountain, one is able to grasp both the sanctity of flattening difference and the possibilities in erasing it via commodification. Oh man. Though it is stressed that the marvel of the ready-made is too up. This is where I should have done it in order. Though it is stressed that the marvel of the ready-made is its uplift of an everyday and ordinary object, the socioeconomic function of the toilet becomes further abstracted. The toilet and the drinking fountain occupy a space of recurrence in U.S. history. They are banal emblems of colonial and gendered signage, interpolated by public policy, wealth, sanitation, decorum, and personalized into rituals and phobias. By calling so this is why, and I jumped the gun, and we'll come back to it. But this is why Purefoy's point is important. By erasing difference, by calling a urinal a fountain, and erasing the context of the segregation and the exclusion involved in defining white and whiteness as material, in this case as property, it erases all that anyone colonized would have to experience: the colored toilet, the colored fountain, the segregated experience, the colonized experience. But Duchamp's fountain does not become every urinal in the world. The act does not legislate on behalf of makers of commodities or those commoditized. Democratize art making, redistribute the function of the artist to include proletarians and those unnamed yet essential to the materials of art, nor does it demystify the function of the artist. Rather, the act further cements the exceptionality of the artist, the exceptionality of the collection, and the innovation of modern art. White people are so special because we can say that a urinal is a fountain and call it a sculpture. Art is closely held as a measure of white freedoms, and Duchamp's ready-made marks an important turn in this enterprise. Harris argues whiteness was the characteristic, the attribute, the property of free human beings. Going back to human is white, white is human. If you're not white, can't be human. And this question on Fanon, a little teaser for tomorrow's remix. And when we look at Vijay Prashad and the Tricontinental Conference, the 60th anniversary of the Tricontinental Conference, where we follow Prashad's encouragement, as he said recently, that we reread Cabral's speech to that conference, which I just did. We see some contradictions in not only, we see the contradictions in, I see contradictions in Prashad's limiting definition or limitations imposed on Fanon. When Fanon is making this point about what does it mean to have the colonizer define humanity, and what does the colonized have to do to regain it? But that's tomorrow morning. Willem de Kooning illustrates this timeline in Renaissance and Order, a lecture given at Studio 35 in New York in 1950. Quote, there is a train track in the history of art that goes way back to Mesopotamia. It skips the whole Orient, the Mayas, and the American Indians. Duchamp is on it. And what is de Kooning doing? Just saying real art requires Western civilization, the European humanity. The rest of these savages, proto-humans or whatever, can't create art. They're not on this train track, this track of art. De Kooning does not explain why his train must travel so far only to exclude the world's majority, but Harris crystallizes that whiteness shares the critical characteristics of property even as the meaning of property has changed over time. In particular, whiteness and property share a common premise, a conceptual nucleus of a right to exclude. The found form is dependent on its origin story, which proclaims that the idea can be separated from the object. This is why I argue that conceptual art is the commodification of narrative forms and speaks to the monetization of circulation. The story of its aestheticization, its politics, and this aestheticization is dependent on the narrative circulation. How many people know and believe it? Oh man, this is just all of this stuff that I'm focused on in terms of the narrative around Black capitalism and buying power. This is all to me an overlap, a series of bars of overlap. To create an aesthetic, to create a Black capitalist, Black entrepreneurial, buy Black, bank Black, Black excellence aesthetic, you have to have the power of a circulating narrative. It's the aestheticization of that. The aestheticization of Black capitalism is dependent on its narrative circulation. Thus, in the introduction, I described the event of Fountain as mythology, as the story white artists and patrons retell to subsume the property form as the most innovative form of art. So, for my more narrow purposes, the mythology of Black capitalism is the story white analysts, pundits retell to subsume the property form, or to subsume. I'm gonna have to think about how to fully borrow this analogy or create this parallel, whatever I'm trying to do here. Black capitalism is the story white artists want retold to subsume. Yeah, I guess it is. It is also the same, to subsume the property form as the most innovative form of art, to subsume the private property and accumulation of wealth and the exploitation of labor as the most innovative form of an economy. If the reading of property in Found is unfamiliar, it is because the racial actualities of US and world history are made unfamiliar while simultaneously naturalized. To reiterate, the objects linked to these narratives do not disappear. They remain on sale and display. I bring this up to say that on every level, representational, functional, political, and aesthetic, the invention of the ready-made via a 1917 urinal fountain could never be a neutral product of liberation. It is a historically telling gesture of white property relations and of whiteness made neutral. This mundane observation becomes overlooked because museum art functions as property, and property in US and European culture functions as a vehicle of whiteness. Commodity objects are valued according to their narrative appeal, and this is how immateriality become materialized as property. Harris writes, in transforming white to whiteness, the law masked the ideological content of racial definition and the exercise of power required to maintain it. It converted an abstract concept into an entity. The abstract concept of whiteness is made a legal concept and an entity in society by its ability to exclude others. Duchamp's fountain does not invite its making, its study, or an interrogation of history. It aestheticizes its conquering and rewrites this narrative as an object of beauty. Portending digital commodities, fantasies for this object become fulfilled as property, and this transaction becomes the political climax for modernist art. I don't know why exactly I keep thinking of NFT when I see this, you know, and even Bitcoin and blockchain. Portending digital commodities, fantasies for the object become fulfilled as property. And this transaction becomes the political climax for modernist art. So it was like modernist art. I think Barcelona just solidified their victory. Portending digital commodities, NFTs, right? And the fantasy for this object become fulfilled as property. We got to own this JPEG. But I also see it as the same. It is very much the conversion of from white abstraction to white entity is maintained tenuously, violently, culturally, legally, and monetarily. So it may be carried and may be circulating narratively through a digital product or a so-called piece of art. But ultimately, the conversion from white abstraction to entity is maintained tenuously through violence, cultural imperialism, legal structures, and finance. The basis of this conversion is material, historical violence. It is the conversion from white fantasies to white property. The maintenance of white space requires active concealment of the material violence required to transform fantasies into property. Colonial appropriation as methodology and practice is a tool that assesses and positions economic and property values. Raymond Williams' notions of the dominant, residual, and emergent are pivotal to understanding how structural violence often becomes qualified and obscured via the idealization of structural transformation or individuated metamorphosis. Wow. During lifetimes of Duchamp and the Arnsbergs, segregation was the dominant legal structure and therefore shaped every part of life and existence. Legal segregation and the aestheticization of segregation work in tandem, and the residual affective and intellectual protection of segregation, the leftover feelings, in a reflection of ongoing dominance, has become interpolated as proprietary, exceptional, canonical, and innovative. The leftover feelings of segregation reflected in an ongoing in a reflection of ongoing. So it reflected as ongoing dominance through, in a slight interpolation, an adjustment of the proprietary, exceptional, canonical, and innovative. So that's the same thing. That's why the canonical arguments in academia are often established on the base of imperialism and colonialism. The dominant narrative and framed approaches to the study of economics, pop culture, et cetera, and so forth, are all there as leftover feelings and a reflection of the ongoing dominance. The leftover feelings and the preservation of property forms is not emergence. It is simply the maintenance of historical and material forms of domination. In accordance with the ontology of property rights, race is rendered invisible and denied, and whiteness is vitalized in the permanent collection. Duchamp's whiteness and the extraordinary patronage are not factors. Duchamp's whiteness and extraordinary patronage are not factors in the fountain and his oeuvre's critical importance. They are the conditions of its existence. You're not popular because you're essential and you're merit-based, critically necessary or important. It's because somebody rich and white said, I like it, and I'm going to make it important. It is the exclusive and the exclusionary position of the white male artist that grants him the power to make commodity into property and property into art. All of this is so fascinating just in this one chapter, because this whole point here about how do you even have found art if you don't have the pre-existing theft of land and the conquering of territory? Though the land was not abstract and never vacant for purposes of ownership, it was made as such. Does that sound familiar? Anything happening in the world right now where it was said there's a land with no people and a people with no land, and therefore we can just take it and snatch it up and do whatever the hell we want? Philip Harper explains how abstraction made the conditions of settler colonialism, chattel slavery possible. The land ordinances of 1785, the technocratic system used to colonize 75% of the United States before the passing of the 1862 Homestead Acts, allowed for the land to be imagined and claimed as vacant. Land is made abstract in the surveying system so that settlement is understood through a grid rather than through the lives of the people, the environment, through its life. Supporting Harris's argument about the foundational function of property, if aesthetic abstraction and its assumed vacancy precedes propertization, then, as Harper deftly points out, emptiness is packaged for easy consumption. What? The foundational function of property, if aesthetic abstraction and its assumed vacancy precedes propertization, then, as Harper deftly points out, emptiness is packaged for easy consumption. Again, I'm hearing all these same things. I'm just the genreification, the social construct of race, the imperial division of land along arbitrary lines of geography. All is done so that if you can define a space and a people, you can define the space and the people's interests, and therefore you can define those interests along what interests you want to manage and serve. And similar to what we're going to look at in a few minutes, it's the world majority that have to reset all of these colonial narratives. It is post-colonial Black feminist scholars who have studied the racialized investments of such abstractions. Abstract space situated the plane on which imperialism abroad would fail to be considered real in the United States. So, through the flattening grid of abstraction, the wealth generated from the ventures of former colonies or within pockets of the global South now situated in the global North could be considered as profits rather than acts of devastation. It's not imperialism to do the Monroe or the Donroe Doctrine. It's not devastation to invade Venezuela and to wipe out the indigenous population here. The United States doesn't do imperialism. That's what the old European folks did. Remember, white folks still like to say that white Americans were the colonized. Patricia Bradley's book, one of my favorites of all time, Propaganda and Slavery. Right? Wait, no. I think I got the author wrong. I think I got the author wrong. Propaganda, but the book is Propaganda and Slavery, where she talks about, and that's why years ago I stopped drinking Sam Adams beer, because Sam Adams was a propagandist who used propaganda to promote slavery only as a concept associated to what white Americans were suffering at the hands of the British, not what white Americans were doing to actually enslaved Africans. Because that's how they do it. We're the sufferers. This is definitely demonstrated by Jody Bird's scholarship on how the land utilized for Japanese American internment camps were often those of tribal nations who protested their building, and this abstraction of land in colonial time operationalizes native deterritorialization. Deterritorialization. The empty time of settler colonialism coincides with the abstraction of all that it works to dispossess from the land to its persons. While usually not read as such, Duchamp's Fountain and the Ready-Made may be reconsidered if it is contextualized in the world of Noah Purifoy's White Colored, an outdoor sculpture in Joshua Tree that places a porcelain toilet next to a drinking fountain in the slash landscape of racial capitalism and history materialized by Purifoy. The viewer is asked to consider the historical context of U.S. public spaces and symbols of sanitation, such as the fountain and its correlate, the urinal. So what Kim does here is so again, this is Purifoy's White Colored, the drinking fountain next to the toilet, made in Joshua Tree in the desert, which comes up as somewhat important here in just a minute, because this is, again, meant to return to its context, the segregated lived experience of Black people here in this country, and really throughout the colonized world, but specifically here in the United States. All right. So, and I like what Kim does here. Why has found not been followed up by questions of where and when, where and how? In the case of Duchamp's and many others, discovery, the found form, are the context of segregation and the land on which it unfolds. Paired and titled this way, the two objects epitomize the visual markers of U.S. racial segregation. There is a drinking fountain exclusively for whites, or perhaps there is a fountain for whites and a toilet for others. It's not really clear in the art, but that's interesting. Whereas again, Duchamp's fountain as urinal, as sculpture, erases all of this context. As witnessed by modernism's celebration of fountain, white liberation happened in isolation and through segregation. Black cultural production during this time and since took an entirely different approach to the question of authorship and liberation. Black newspapers, and particularly Du Bois's Crisis, were without mention of Marcel Duchamp, found objects or ready-mades. They were focused on Black cultural producers, and periodicals witnessed a transnational Black radical activism hinged on opposing anti-Blackness and imperialism. Crisis instead forged its position via transnational articulation of Blackness, with a radically different definition of freedom. So, art of itself is of no value if in its relatedness it does not affect change. A change in behavior of human beings, and changes in behavior are affected through communication. For Purifoy and Michelle, the colleagues and co-authors of Junk Art, they side decidedly with Du Bois on this point, that in opposition to the politics of art for art's sake, that art is meant to communicate a politics of revolutionary change. For this reason, Roderick Ferguson places Purifoy, and again, this is a nice foreshadowing segue of sorts. For this reason, Roderick Ferguson places Purifoy within the lineage of the Black radical tradition, rather than that of the avant-garde abstract art, conceptualism, or modernism. Specifically, the assemblage art practiced by Purifoy operationalizes Black people and communities into history rather than away from it. Likewise, Daniel Widener situates Purifoy's assemblage as a kind of historical materialism differentiated from the abstraction of depoliticized understandings of found, because he's situating it within a context of racial segregation. And of course, Purifoy's work, well, not of course, this is new to me, but Purifoy's work going back to the 1960s has always been meant to be this challenge to the Duchampian model. That is, he used art, he found art from the Watts riots or uprisings to create his own pieces. While Duchamp is utilized by artists and art historians as a shield against historical materialism in context, Ferguson and Widener demonstrate how Purifoy's art must and can only be read through context, namely the Watts Rebellion, the Black radical tradition, and Purifoy's changing politics. Contrary to the museum logic of preservation and care, the fate of white colored is to be slowly but surely desecrated. White colored is linked to the symbols of white property, and these objects and spaces must disintegrate. I love this point. Museums want to preserve and care and impose, as we saw earlier from Duchamp's and Philadelphia Museum, a permanency. Whereas Purifoy's art is saying, no, this is not permanent. These materials I found from the context of my oppression, they will fade, as will your oppression. In this white colored erupts nature. It reminisces on the true function of object, and by doing so exposes what empire is, what it does to its own, what it eats and shits. In this configuration and by precise measurements, it explodes the fantasy of fountain and needs none of its mythology to survive. Woo, woo. Ruscha was discussed in the previous chapter as emblematic of the artist who celebrates white property as new art. How then do we grapple with the fact that Purifoy's outdoor museum, too, was established via the patronage of white actors who purchased and owned unceded land? What do we make of the ideological and material continuum of the museum form? So this is what Kim threw. When I read this, I said, Kim is throwing a little curve on us. Because after telling us this Purifoy's black radical tradition and exploding the mythology of the fountain, Kim comes back right there to say, but you know what? Purifoy got white benefactors too, on land defined as available after colonized, being stolen. What does my note say? Oh, and me on YouTube. I'm just acknowledging. I was just acknowledging my own contradiction. That this is the curveball. So a few pages ago, I'm sitting there saying that's what I'm doing. What did I say? What I'm part of the explosion of the fountain, and my work is also meant to expose empire, what it does, what it does to its own, and what it eats and shits. But I'm on YouTube. Now, I don't have white benefactors. I don't have any white patrons sponsoring, but I am on stolen land and stolen an imperial colonized digital space. Though Purifoy's critiques of the avant-garde and his deviations from white modernist understandings of culture are situated in the trajectory of the black radical tradition, and as such, his art deserves critical care and protection, the museum form continues to interpolate what Manu Karuka describes as the prose of counter-sovereignty. And I did think about that contradiction of what I'm doing here. That in some way I'm still preserving a museum form that is it being interpolated as a prose of counter-sovereignty. It would be remiss to evade the function of land and critiques of property. How might critiques of property materialize land? The expectation here is not for writers and artists to have complete and perfect critiques of settler colonialism and racial capitalism, but for thinkers, readers, and activists engaged in the politics of abolition and reparations to seek and demand the most robust critiques of the colonial order, to take what the thinkers, artists, and writers have considered and offered before us and ask for more possibility, just as we may ask this of ourselves. So listen, I on some level, I want to apologize to Yoon Song Kim and encourage people to check out this book, The Politics of Collecting, Race, and the Aestheticization of Property. I've read several chapters of it, and it's there's so much going on, and it's again new to me in some ways over my head. It's fascinating. So, and I don't know if I'm interpreting it properly, but I'm just sharing properly. But I am property pun intended. But I am absolutely meaning to overlap my own hate for museums with what is being said here. And so some of those dominant points are just very clear that that this is not about merit. This is about what the white elite want, about a permanency of imposing a narrative, about materializing whiteness, and encouraging certain frames and interpretations on our current experience so that ultimately we don't rebel. So how does a urinal become a sculpture? By making, well, how does a urinal become a sculpture? Through imperialism and colonialism, through capitalism and finance and investment and a white ruling elite projecting its interest, communicating and recycling a narrative of their dominance through art, through a sculpture. So choose your commodity fetishes wisely. Well said. Well said. Folks, please do like, share, subscribe, support the platform however you like. Welcome, everybody. Got a little bit more to go as I watch Barcelona celebrate in the background. If whoever, I forgot who was asking me earlier about damn, I almost said AFRICOM. God. Please feel free to post any updates. All right, let's urinals, bruh. I'm telling you, this is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. And that's from 1917, 100. Well, that remake was probably from the 60s, but almost 100 years later, apparently that is still, this is still considered, elite art in the art world. All right, but so folks, please, if you haven't, did a video the other day asking why or how does Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism discourage Marxism? And so as an extension of part two, or as an extension of that, I want to bring up something and raise the question: does Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism stretch Marxism as opposed to discourage Marxism? And I want to first of all thank all of the very principled commenters and private commenters on that video. A lot of great discussions and thoughts and responses. One of them, so I want to start with one of them, because I didn't do that for this, but I probably will for a future video because it's very important and very well written. You got to read Of Black Study by Josh Myers. If I know he's written more on Robinson, but his chapter on Robinson in that book is very strong. I think very well written. and makes some what for me are very important points. Again, I may not be interpreting them as Myers would have intended, much like Kim in the previous discussion, but the short of it is, as some of you have pointed out, Robinson, and I don't know if it came, I can't remember now if it came up or if I was very clear on this, but Robinson himself does not aggressively or at all discourage an engagement with Marx and Marxism. Many of his readers have interpreted him to be saying discard Marx entirely. But several of you pointed out to me that that's a misreading of Robinson's intent. And when you read Myers' chapter on Robinson in Of Black Study, I do think you get a more accurate than the Steve Edwards critique view of Robinson as someone who's not saying get rid of Marx, but saying stretch him. And one thing that is very clear is that Robinson, beyond Black Marxism, had a lot to say, wrote a lot about a lot of things, including Marx and Marxism. So really my point, and somebody put in the comments of that other video, they were saying, well, Dr. Ball, I saw what you had to say, and after watching this whole video, I'm not really clear on what side you're on. And my comment and response was, I'm not on a side. I'm not saying we have to pick Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism critique or Karl Marx's Marxist analysis. I'm saying, actually, what I have always been saying is, and this is what I kind of mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I've been less thrilled with the use of racial capitalism as an approach and a frame is because I've always thought an internal colonial model that pre-existed and has been prefigured and argued does all that we need for an analysis and collapses a lot of the unnecessary arguments between so-called nationalists, even revolutionary, and hardcore Marxists. That's just been so. My point wasn't to say you have to pick Robinson or the socialists or the Marxist Leninists. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, if anything, we need all of it. We need a version of all of it to do national liberation without socialism. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow morning on the Remix Morning Show over there in Black Liberation Media. But to do nationalism without socialism is a setup just to replace a bourgeois. It is, as was said, as I heard, and even as I've been kind of critical of him, I like what Vijay Prashad said about this, and look at this tomorrow, is to have sovereignty without dignity. You can be sovereign, you can have national independence and be sovereign from imperialism. But what about the dignity of the people in that society? Without socialism, there is no dignity. There's just a national bourgeoisie exploiting and oppressing their own people. So all that to say, I picked up a book and just want to share the preface of it with you because it makes some interesting points. It is written by somebody I've actually met and paneled with. So years ago, and I mean not to, Ramon Gross-Fugel, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And Ramon and I met years ago at through the late great Robert Allen, which I just reposted his lecture and an interview I did with him years ago. Please check that out if you haven't already. And we were revisiting at a conference celebrating Allen's Black Awakening in Capitalist America, and just his work in general, actually. But we were at a conference, so yeah. Anyway, and I got to meet Ramon and obviously Allen himself and several others, and I do think I got hated on by a little bit by the late great Robert Crispin. It was kind of funny actually because I had on an African top, and after I gave my comments about internal colonialism and my reference to African people here in the United States, Robert Crispin started his remarks with a kind of a sarcastic Habari Ghani, something like that. It was kind of funny. It was kind of funny. But salute to Crispin, the late great co-founder of the Black Scholar Journal and longtime friend and comrade of Robert Allen. But But I just want to talk a little bit about this chapter here, the global contributions of black decolonial Marxism. In a book called Marxism and Decolonization in the 21st Century, Living Theories and True, actually, let me just get to the cover because I can't remember, I don't see the whole title there. Marxism and Decolonization in the 21st Century, Living Theories and True Ideas, edited by Ndlovu Gatsheni and Ndlovu. So, and it's got a few, I've only read a couple of the essays in here. They're very interesting. I'm going to come back to this book, but that's not the intro. I just wanted to get to the forward because, but as an extension of this previous discussion of Cedric Robinson and this critique of Robinson, I wanted to come back to this, and you'll see why here in just a second. This book is a fundamental contribution to the many contemporary questions and debates. It's 2021, by the way, when this book came out. My bad. This is terrible. I just want to confirm that 2021 was when the book came out. Can I confirm that real quick? No, I cannot. Yeah, 2022. 2022. All right, there we go. First published in 2022. This book is a fundamental contribution to the many contemporary questions and debates that are crucial to the global problems that we face in the 21st century. I would say that main achievement of this book is to bridge Marxism and decoloniality by taking seriously the Black Marxist tradition as the mediation between these two literatures. All right. A lot of what all right. So yeah. There is epistemic ignorance in westernized universities, even among the westernized left, about Black Marxism due to several factors. One factor behind the invisibility of critical thought produced by Black Marxists is the most obvious: epistemological racism. All right? So he points that out. And one of the ways that he makes that point is to say that excluded from westernized university curricula are great works from folks like Kwame Nkrumah, C.L.R. James, Carla Jones, Harry Haywood, Walter Rodney, Amilcar Cabral, Ami Césaire, Oliver L. Cox, and so on. Even Cedric Robinson's masterpiece, Black Marxism, is available only in the English language and at a very expensive price. Now, one of the things that I thought was fascinating about this forward is that Gross-Figel conflates, maybe too heavy a negative. I feel like he seems to be conflating, or he's using interchangeably Robinson's Black Marxism and Black Marxists. And he's putting them all in the same category, despite all of their differences and, in some cases, contradictions. So I just thought that was interesting as I read this. But this epistemic extractivism that he talks about, I do think is interesting because he goes through some examples of how non-Black scholars have taken the ideas of Black scholars and popularized them without it being credited to those scholars. This epistemic extractivism. There is no so-called justice without cognitive justice. The epistemic injustice against Black Marxist thinkers is not globally recognized. The origins of many critical theorists can be traced to the critical thought of Black Marxists, yet these theories do not acknowledge their origins in the Black radical tradition known as Black Marxism. So see, that's what I'm saying here. Cedric Robinson was not defining the Black radical tradition as Black Marxism, or in the way that I think Gross-Figel is, he's saying, Robinson was saying Black Marxism is the Black radical tradition, not that Black Marxists engaging in Marxist analysis are the Black radical tradition. Am I making sense? You all see, is that, am I, I'll check the chat in a minute, but put in the comments if you've seen this later. Like, am I, you know, Oh, this is interesting. Is this true? Robin Kelly says the title should be read Black Marxism with a question mark. I don't remember that, but that's interesting. Okay. I would like to illustrate this by discussing three theories: world systems, coloniality of power, and internal colonialism. And that's what brought sort of us together at that panel, or that conference, panel and conference. Here he's talking about C. Wright Mills took the concept from the Black Marxists, let's see, C. Wright, what is he saying? So, world systems, he says, Oliver Cox, a Black Caribbean man from Trinidad and Tobago, created or gave its historical conceptualization to. But this was not credited to him, and both Braudel and Arrighi cited Cox in their respective works. However, Cox remains unknown, and access to his books is difficult and quite expensive. The theory of internal colonialism also ignores its origins in Black Marxist thought. We always see cited in the literature the name of white scholars such as Harold Wolpe, Pablo Gonzalez Casanova, Rodolfo Stavenhagen, Robert Blonner, William Tabb, and so on. Actually, at the time, 20-some years ago, I don't think I knew that Blonner and Tabb were white. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. The origin of the theory of internal colonialism is always attributed to the 1965 articles of white Mexican scholars such as Pablo Gonzalez Casanova and Rodolfo Stavenhagen. However, both have admitted publicly that they were not the originators of the concept of internal colonialism. They admit that they heard term for the first time at the Rio de Janeiro conferences of the American Marxist C. Wright Mills in the early 60s. Mills himself got the concept from Black Marxists, starting with Du Bois. Actually, I do have to say that in I Mix What I Like, without making this point directly, I kind of did make this point. Because the way I construct my argument around internal colonialism uses mostly Black, although I did think at the time Blonner and Tabb were Black, but mostly Black scholars, including Du Bois and Martin Delany and Jack Odell, so, I don't mind patting myself on the back a little bit. You know what I mean? Harry Haywood conceptualized the Black Belt as an internal colony. The economy of the region is not controlled by the Negro capitalists. Its immediate direction is in the hands of white local capitalists and landlords who act as the outpost command for the real rulers of the financial dynasty of Wall Street. The origins of the concept of internal colonialism in the Black Marxist tradition are clearly undeniable. Less well known is the idea of coloniality, that is, that racism is an organizing principle of modernity's power hierarchies and capitalist accumulation at the world scale, was formulated by Black Marxists. For Robinson, Cedric, that is, the modern world system and global capitalism are racial from their beginnings, because for him, European colonial expansion is expansion of a civilization in which racial capitalism already existed. For Robinson, even the pre-1492 intra-European racialism was not marked by skin color, but by religious and ethnic identities. It was crucial to understand what happened after 1492 in the Americas, Africa, and the rest of the world. There was an interesting critique in the comments in my the other video on this, where someone was saying that the Steve Edwards authored that critique and said that Robinson had, along with the scholar he quoted, skipped the 1500 years of history between Aristotle and the rise of modern capitalism, in order to make the argument that the racism of Aristotle just automatically transferred. And the critique was, that the author ignores the fact that Robinson spends a good portion of the first part of the book outlining this history of the development of Europe, including this idea of bringing old feudal and religious structures that would have included this early racial capitalist frame into the new forms of governance. And my point was, well, I read it as Edwards was saying that Robinson was not ignoring all of the history of the rise of Europe. But was I probably shouldn't have done this without having the comment in front of me, but was saying that had not done enough to show that the racism described by Aristotle showed itself in the how that racism made its way over the 1500-year period. So not that he ignored the 1500 years, but he ignored the specific rise of a new form of racism over that 1500 years is what the Edwards critique I took to be saying. But Fanon said that in the colonies, what the Marxists call infrastructure economy is really superstructure racism. The economy is already organized in a racist way. This is why Fanon insisted that in the colonies and neo-colonies, Marxist analysis should be modified. Fanon said the settler's town is well fed. And I actually love this because I quoted this same passage and I mixed what I like. So I was actually, the settler's town is a well-fed town, an easy-going town. Its belly is always full of good things. The settler's town is a town of white people, of foreigners. The town belonging to the colonized people, or at least the native town, the Negro village, the Medina, the reservation, is a place of ill fame, peopled by men of evil repute. They are born there. It matters little who, where, or how. They die there. It matters not where or how, nor how. It is a world without spaciousness. Men live there on top of each other in their huts, and huts are built one on top of the other. The native town is a hungry town, starved of bread, of meat, shoes, coal, and of light. For Fanon, it is race, not class, which divides the zone of being and the zone of non-being. The governing race, and foremost those who come from elsewhere, those who are unlike the original inhabitants, the others. That's, according to Fanon, what is the the superstructure that Marx is not able to consider properly. But you can see the same idea of coloniality expressed not only by Fanon, but by many other Black Marxists. Using different terms, the African Marxist Kwame Ture said white racist social structure is not inherent in a colonial situation. It is inseparable from the capitalist economic development. In fact, he said capitalism is the equivalent practice of domestic colonization. In other words, wherever there is a race problem, it has to be linked with a class struggle, said Nkrumah. In addition, he said, in the areas the Black man in the United States is in a condition of domestic colonialism and suffers both on the grounds of class and color. Stuart Hall is mentioned here. Black Marxist has spoken out about race as an articulator principle of the political, social, and ideological structures where the capitalist modes of production sustains itself using of both free and coerced labor. The ignorance, the lack of recognition, and the absence of translations of Black Marxist intellectuals have made many intellectuals around the world believe that the idea of coloniality was an exclusive and original idea of Anibal Quijano. So this is in many ways like the opposite of my argument around Black capitalist narratives, which are symbolically Black but white conservative in their origin. And then we have this reverse among the left in academia where Black radical ideas are rebranded as white, or at least non-Black. It's fascinating. It's interesting. So what defines a Black Marxist? And this is where I thought this was interesting. Black Marxism is not a skin color, but a particular form of understanding Marxism and the world at large. Black Marxists think from the social historical experience of Black bodies considered inferior in the articulation between capitalist accumulation and racial domination in a white Western global world. The consequences of rethinking Marxism from the Black experience include the need to stretch and redefine Marxism in a decolonial form, away from its Eurocentric assumptions. And this is where I find this, and this was sort of the point where this was where I find value in the critique of Cedric Robinson, or at least, which I think is better said as a critique of how people read Robinson, or how people interpret Robinson without reading Robinson. And certainly without reading Marx. That to say Black people don't need Marxism, while also ignoring many of the Black activists, organizers, thinkers who do stretch Marxism, or at least not using them as the basis of your critique of Marxism, because that was the other part that moved me in the critique of Robinson, was that a lot of his criticism of Marxism came from anti-Marxist, non-African people, apparently. So my point being, it is of great value to me, even where I find shortcomings in Marx or those who are Marxists in their analysis, that he be engaged, and that more importantly, those in the African world who have stretched Marx on their way to becoming anti-colonial, decolonizing revolutionaries should also be the center of our analyses and debates and arguments, and even our reasons for not engaging Marx, if that makes sense. So if people are going to say we shouldn't read Marx because he's white, well, we also shouldn't read Marx. Well, also our reasons for not reading Marx should not come from white anti-Marxists. Not every thought from a person socially classified as Black in the racial hierarchy produces critical thought or decolonial Marxism. Okay, obviously. The great achievement of the present system has been to make oppressed subjects think epistemically, as do their oppressors. Now we're back on my Black capitalist narrative critique. What Fanon calls the epidermization of social structures is the internalization of Black bodies. What Fanon calls the epidermization of social structures is the internalization in Black bodies of the behavioral habits and thoughts of white supremacy. So all of the Black capitalist narrative is epidermization. In sum, we cannot assume the reductionist position that the racial social position corresponds in a one-to-one mechanical and inherent way to the epistemic position. It is quite common to be socially classified as Black in the racial hierarchy, yet think epistemically like whites. If we want to avoid reductionist essentialism, we cannot collapse the social position of a person into the epistemic position. Ooh, man, that's if we want to avoid reductionist essentialism or narrow nationalism or reactionary forms of so-called Black solidarity, we cannot collapse the social position of a person into the epistemic position. So we can't just see someone speaking as, a shout out to Pastanus, darkly packed person, and just assume that because they present and perform a certain style, that they are epistemically Black. And that their ways of knowing are based in Black radicalism. We can't assume that. Can't assume it. And yet, as Gross-Figel points out, the experience of Blackness, as he says also about the experience of womanhood, create the more likelihood that a Black Marxist will be Black and a feminist theorist will be a woman. He mentions Bob Blauner and David Roediger as examples of white scholars who properly attribute their Black Marxist foundation. And I was reminded of, and this is something I'm gonna have to come back to. I did not know this a year ago. Robert McChesney died, the white legendary communication scholar, who I will say I paneled with and debated a little bit, but also found a lot of support from and learned a lot from. But when he used to have his show, his podcast, he interviewed David Roediger twice about race in America. And this was one of the examples I remember because for a time between, I noticed this too, by the way. I'm gonna have to deal with this too. According to Wikipedia, I'm not accounted as part of the founding group of Black Agenda Report. And as Black Agenda Report goes into its 20th anniversary year, where my relationship is what it is I'm gonna have to reimpose myself apparently and reclaim my because Wikipedia, Margaret, Glenn, of course, Bruce, and Letitia Stills. And I was like, I also noticed I got sent this thing, apparently Grok, which I do not use and do not support. I'm about to leave. I think I'm about to leave X entirely. It sends out, it has its own Wikipedia thing. And I got sent a thing with mine on it. It doesn't mention Black Agenda Report either. And I'm feeling a kind of way about it. I was there at the very beginning. I was there when he was still a Black commentator. And when I was offered by Peter Gamble, the white funder and editor of Black Commentator, to take over Glenn's spot, I said, hell no, I'm going with Glenn. So I was feeling kind of way about that. I'm gonna have to fight for my credit. I want my credit. But David Roediger's name came up, and in this book, and I thought about it because McChesney had interviewed him twice on his podcast, and I said, and I remember writing McChesney, and I said, this is like an issue. Glenn Ford is probably one of the greatest thinkers on race and class in the country at the time, blah, blah, blah. And Roediger, and that was the thing. Roediger, in those conversations, Glenn got mentioned. Roediger had been reading Glenn's work. So I said, you mentioned Glenn twice. Here's his email. Interview him. And he did. He eventually did. To his credit, he eventually did. But I was like, I used to be a little bit hawkish on that. I think what's his name is mad at me still. Some people mad at me still for that. I was like, look, man, you can't be out here talking about race and class and then mentioning Glenn and not have him on. Two Black Marxists have conceptualized the present modern world system as a civilization. Aimee Césaire and Cedric Robinson. The civilization that let me just move on here a little bit. This is an important debate among Black Marxists with important implications for global debates today on the question about how to understand the role of epistemic contributions of the indigenous civilizations destroyed by European colonization in the projects of liberation today. Yeah, this was due to the complicity and collaboration of colonized tribal leaders from the pre-modern African systems with European colonizers. Many Black Marxists reject and block the use of pre-modern traditional systems as a way of thinking about decolonization in Africa. In other words, this is the ongoing debate between the African-centered and the Marxist materialists. And again, I've always thought that the internal colonial model solves this problem. As others have argued, you simply take from the past what is of value today and discard the rest. We don't need every bit of those traditional cultural approaches. Some of them do need advance and updating. But we can inform those updates on some of the basis of those perspectives that are still of value as we consider that question. Again, I'll give him credit for Prashad's framing of it. so that the sovereignty that Africans have also comes with dignity. And I don't think vague allusions to pre-colonial collectivism in traditional African societies solves that question as we talk about a post-colonial, so-called postmodern moment where a class of society is achieved after an overthrow of these imperialists takes place. So we need the appreciation of pre-colonial African culture. We need different concepts, pre-colonial concepts of the world, time, space. All of that, I think, is of value. But we can't ignore the world from which we would be decolonizing and building anew. So yeah, that was really. I'll stop there. I just thought it was interesting. What I thought was, and maybe this is done on purpose or just to avoid the conflict, that Gross-Fugel is saying Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism as a critique of Marx is a stretching of Marx and not an encouragement to discourage engagement with Marx, but is also saying in the stretching that we need the experience of the colonized to be centered in this decolonial process. Pre-modern African systems is a synonym for religion and culture, according to Robinson. Yeah. So, all right. I'm going to stop there unless there are any comments, questions, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, consternation. And I will, let's see, I will bring this up.
Money. You think I did this for money? I did this for credit. But you always for credit. Fuck my life. Fuck my life. I want the credit. The credit. You can't do it. Don't you tell me that. Don't you ever tell me that. I am the producer of the show. If I didn't step up, you're nowhere. I put this thing together out of spit and polish. I'll tell you right now, for once in my life, I will not be pissed on. You hear me? I want the credit. I want the credit. Take it. Goodbye.
Yeah. How do I get this out of here? I do love that movie, Wag the Dog, and I do want my credit. I want the credit. You know? Pancho, in many indigenous American societies, there's no distinction between religion, politics, economics, and culture. Yeah, yeah. And mathematics, science too. Yeah, they are co-constituted. Yeah. I guess I don't think that, and I'm not saying, Pancho, you're doing this, but I think it does happen that realization and recognition, I don't think needs to lead to a disregard of Marx and of Africans and others in the world who've engaged Marx's work to great end. That would really be my only point. Why would I invite calumnies? Why not? And it's alliterative, that's why. But why not? Let it be said while I'm here live, right? because as soon as we wrap up, they'll be said in the well, actually, no. Now that I set the comments to subscribers only and members only, I get less of the nonsense. People are less likely even to just subscribe briefly to leave some hateful comments, although some do. Some will go through the whole process of subscribing and waiting the time period just so they can post some stupidness. But whatever. Yeah, man, I'm and much like what's his name's character, it doesn't always go well because old boy, not to spoiler alert, but old boy doesn't survive that attempt to get his credit. Dustin Hoffman, he doesn't survive that attempt to get his credit. You know what I'm saying? They I think he's reported as having some kind of heart attack. Dr. Nadell. I'm too easy on him, huh? That's fair. I'm not mad at anyone being more to my left. But yeah, tomorrow, so just so folks, in terms of my own. Right. Robinson never discouraged engaging Marx, as some of his readers suggest, mostly those who never themselves engaged Marxism. He called out its need to be stretched. Yeah. Okay. I'm just checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. But so tomorrow morning on Black Liberation Media on the Remix Morning Show, we got a Monday edition of the Remix Morning Show, and we're going to get into a number of. Oh man, I'm looking at my notes here. Cabral in the Tricontinental Conference, and in no particular order of importance or politics, but Netflix and second screen viewing. Don Lemon went at Stephen A. Smith. Can you imagine that? We're going to have some fun. Oh, I can't wait to have some fun with that tomorrow. If there's one little thing to glean of happiness in this Trump moment, it is the fractures it is causing in some segments of both the right and left. Oh, Mbappe did play. Oh, man, it didn't work. So seeing Don Lemon go at Stephen A. Smith is super funny. Seeing, as we'll talk about tomorrow morning, the Philadelphia sheriff going at ICE is funny. To see Tom Clancy and Jack Ryan prefigure Venezuela, not funny, but interesting. We'll talk about that. First Black-owned mall. ICE. ICE ICE and its use of social media detection. Rashad Rishi's academic fraud, allegedly. What else I got on here? Man, Palestinian football. We can't even have Palestinian football, man. Something very interesting on how this issue of Venezuela and narco-terrorism got defined back in the 80s under Reagan, who died during my wedding. Yes, Chitty Matcha. And I know you don't miss shit. Everywhere I'm at, Chitty Matcha is. So I don't know what your life is like, but everywhere I end up, I see you in the comments, in the chat, on Twitter. But yeah, it has been funny to watch. So we're gonna get into some of that tomorrow. Yeah, I didn't know Philly had a sheriff either. But she is there. She's a Black woman, and she had nothing but tough talk for them ICE folks, which is, we not with the police either. But so it's interesting. Oh, Poncho. I don't know if you've been paying attention to this. I don't watch TYT at all. I've never seen 1 minute of Rashad Rishi, his show. But a number of people have gone at him with some very convincing arguments and receipts around his many fake degrees, allegedly. but and why someone would need to be both a PhD, or not both, but a PhD, a legal scholar. What else is he saying he's doing? Quantum physics and law. He's like a legal guy. Like, yeah, Chitty Mach is a legend and the GOAT. You know who's not the GOAT? And this would be a good way to wrap up, because this is the hate I get for these is usually what makes me want to leave. But here, this is who is not your GOAT. LeBron James, since joining the Lakers, 1-29 in game-tying go-ahead field goal attempts with 5 seconds or less in the fourth quarter or overtime. 1 for 29. This can't be the GOAT. This stat alone disqualifies him from any chance of being a GOAT. You can't be the GOAT with this record right here. You can't even be. He's not even in my top 10. That's how bad I've gotten with it. But you definitely can't be the GOAT when you 1 for 29. Yeah, he's a quantum legal expert. Are you calling? Ask what happened about what, Leah? About Rashad? Oh, or something else. Yeah. Anyway, good people. Listen. So some of you, hopefully all of you, I'll see you tomorrow in the Remix Morning Show over there in Black Liberation Media. Thank you for coming through this afternoon. Please do all the things. And as always, peace, only if you're willing to fight for it. As Fred Hampton used to say, and we'll see you next time around here with more.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm. Kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy and defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.